Creating schemas and models. In this video, we're going to use Mongoose to create schemas and models for our app. A schema represents the shape of our document, and a model represents the document in our collection. So create schemas and models are really simple. First, you create a schema using the Mongoose schema constructor to generate create a schema object of a certain type. And then we're going to create a model by using the model function, and we pass into that function a collection, which is the name of the collection, and the schema. So whatever is used for that collection using the schema, then that will be used for our data or model. So using this method, you can have validations and constraints added to the schema. So our shape is really solidified and unified across our model. And then using our model object, we can then perform all these CRUD operations for our application. So let's go ahead and do that right now. Okay, so in the previous video, we already made the database connection. We made that going to the API folder. In the DB folder, we have a database connection here. We made that. We export that out to our app, and we see the example here. I'll leave this in for now still. We're going to remove that later. But now let's go into the schemas folder and create a schema first. So I'm going to create a file here. I'll call it provider schemas.js. It's only for our providers, okay? So here I'm going to import the Mongoose library. Mongoose. Okay. And then once you got that, then our schema, you can create a variable just to make it short. So we call it schema with a capital S because it's a class. And I'm just going to replace that, replace the Mongoose schema, okay, with that. So you don't have to go mongoose.schema and then the whole thing. Just use one short name. And I'll put a notation here, just say define a schema. Okay, and then here we're going to create a schema. So we're going to create our provider schema. And I'll put a note here to say this is the top level because that is the parent level. And then we're gonna create the model or the schema based on the model here. So if I open the file, you see this is our schema right here, right? In fact, this is just the data itself, but we're gonna change that to a schema. So I'm gonna copy this, and over here, I'm gonna create a new variable called provider schema, and it's going to be new schema. Okay, so this schema, I'm going to pass in an object. Okay, and inside this object is where that whole list goes in, and I'll put a semicolon here. So schema, if you think about schema, it's just like an interface or a class of your model, right? So you don't have actual data. It's the representation of your actual document. So these will be like data type. Okay, so the ID field will be, we're going to remove this. I'm not going to use this ID field anymore. I'll let MongoDB manage that for us. And so MongoDB will create one for us every time you're using the ID_ID field. Okay, so we're going to remove this field completely for this part of the app, and we'll generate that automatically in the MongoDB. And it's much more secure this way either. So the first name, we are going to set a type. It's going to be a type string. So technically you can say, you put an object here, say type, and then colon is going to be a string. Okay. If you, all you do is just as a string type or a number or, you know, a Boolean or whatever it is, you put the type here. If it's just one property, then you can omit the object notation here, just put here like string like that. So this would be ideal for like an optional field. You don't require. But let's say we're going to require the first name to be to have data. So in that's the case, then you want to follow this pattern. So type will be a string, and I want this to be a required field. So you type in the required, and then just say true. Okay. There are a couple of properties you can use in here, like required, the minimum length, the maximum length, and a few other options as well. You can use like default data in here, So I'll use this one here for the rest of the field, well, most of the fields. So that will be the first name required, last name also required. The position, this is, yeah, we'll make that required. Well, maybe make it optional. So just put string here, okay? It can be blank. The company name, yeah, this is required. The address one will be required. This is optional. The city, state, yeah, all these are required. A phone number will be required. The postcode is required. Phone number, let's say that's also required. The email, yeah, definitely required. This description will make that optional. The last two will be optional. Okay, so now you can, do more. So like the state, for example, you can put here the maximum and the minimum will be 2, right? And their max is also 2, for just state code, for example. In the postal code, you can make this a minimum of 5, right? It must have 5 characters or digits. And yeah, something like this will be fine. Okay, so this is our schema, represents the model, which is eventually become the document. Now, what we have here, I mentioned in the other video, is that every time you see a pair of curly braces like this in your model, it's a document. So we have 2 documents here. One is nested inside another document here. Okay, so we have a parent document and a child document. So if we have something like this, you can leave it as is, but it's also very efficient to move this out into its own schema. Okay, so up here, I'm going to have another one. I'll say create a company schema, and this will be a child or a sub document. So we have a 1-to-1 relationship here. So const, I'll call this company schema, new schema, and same thing as before, you pass in that object. So here I'm going to copy the company name, everything to the tagline, cut that out, and paste it in line 8. So we have our 2 separate schema. And then down here in schema, I'm going to replace that with the company schema. Okay, so neat, huh? All right, so be careful though, because we do this way, the order is important. When you use this down here as a type, you must declare this first. So this has to be above the provided schema or it won't work. Okay, so that's important as well. And then now down here, I'm going to export both of these out as an object. Okay, so I'll put the provider schema here first. It doesn't matter, the order is not important here. And then the company as well. The reason why I do this though, we're not going to use it, but just for good practice and good use is because later on, if you come here and add more schemas into this file, you want to be able to reuse them again, export them out. So if you just export only one, then you have to come back and everywhere else you have to go and make some changes, right? So it's nice to put into an object if you're going to pass a lot of them out. So when you access it, you just pick and grab the one you want. So let's save this. And so now next we go to the model. So this is the model. We're not going to use this one here. I'm going to go and create another file. Since I already have one called providers.models, I want to call provider.model, but it might be confusing. So I'm just going to call it provider.js. Okay. So I guess it's understood. We also need to import the mongoose. And this will be mongoose. And then we also need the schemas, right? So we're going to have here a constant. I'm going to do the destructive here, the destruct from the array or the list of objects. Have the provider schema. I just need that. Require that from the schemas, and then we have the provider schemas. Okay, and then here then is where we're going to create the model. And the reason why I mentioned earlier that you do this way because you want to be able to reuse this, as someplace else, right? So now I'm going to go and create a model for our application here. So since we imported that in here, I'm going to go put a comment here, say create the provider model. Okay, so I have a constant, and I'll call this just provider. I'll use capital letter. And we're going to call the mongoose.model function. And inside this function, we're going to pass two things. One is the name of the collection. In our case, I'll call it providers. You can call it with the S, without it. By default, if you have a singular word for your collection, Mongoose will automatically convert that to a plural name. So it will be providers, all lowercase for you. So it's pretty kind of nice, I guess. You kind of have to debate whether you want to do that or not, but I guess that's what Mongoose is designed to do that for you automatically. And then the second is the schema. So in this case, it would be the provider schema. Okay. Now, once you run this file, this function, then this provider object now has access to all the underlying functions at the collection level. So you can do like find and delete, update, and insert. All those commands will be available through this provider object. Okay, so that is really important. And then now all we have to do is export this out. Export the providers out. I'll put here, just for this example here, I put provider as an object. Reason why, again, is because you could have another provider model here that might use a different collection, and you would send that out as well, right? So you're not limited to just one, but a host of them. But for us, I'm just going to put one here, but I use the object anyway, so just to show you that that can be a little bit flexible. So once I got that, then I need to go into the database, and now I need to import that model into this database, because in the end, when I go to the app, for example, you see that I only make one call, right? Everything needs to be imported into that DB so that when I invoke this DB here, all these will be run and then generated. So up here, I'm going to use a constant provider. I'll grab that from the provider models, and then provider, I think just provider, that's the one. And then finally down here though, when we make the connection, I only made this earlier because we wanted to test, but this time I'm not going to use this anymore. I'll be actually exporting this out using this one instead of the connection. So here down the bottom, I'll say module exports, and I'm going to export just the provider this time. Okay, so we'll pass this provider around to wherever we want to make those connections, like those CRUD operations, mainly in the controller over here. So let's save that, and let's go to the app and run it again, and let's make sure it still works. So let's go back to the terminal and do a nomon. So here we have connection successfully, so we're good there, right? And how do we know if we did create this provider collection? Well, we don't know, because if you go to the compass, you won't see it. If you refresh this, you see that it's not here. Although it's here, we don't have any data, so it's not shown. But let's say that if you add some data, then you will see it, but we'll do that next time in a separate video. But so far, this is how you would design this. There are lots of ways to do it, different ways to do it. Instead of putting everything in a single file here, I just like to separate them out into their own separate folder, so that you have easily manage all of them separately when it comes to debugging and things like that. But overall, everything will be accessed through this DB object here. So this is the end of this section. Now that we have successfully connected to MongoDB and created our model, in the next section, we're going to configure our app and update all the APIs to interact with MongoDB.